Really late. Black. I'm just tryna make it out now. I'm just tryna make it out now. I'm just tryna make it out now. I'm just tryna make it out now.
What's up, TBT?
What's up?
Happening, fellas?
What's up?
Real deal?
Hey,
What's happening?
Hey, man, I'm just happy to be in the house tonight, baby.
Yes, sir. Be mobile. What's up, baby?
What's up? Salute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And you already know the God Barber.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm ready. I'm ready for this information that we're about to receive today. I'm ready. It's another episode. I'm ready. Let's do this. Let's do it.
Wait, hold on, God Barber.
What?
You sure?
Yeah, I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I'm Jackie Robinson ready.
Like the hat.
I'm Jackie Robinson
Ready.
Well, you know, God Barber, TBT viewers, you know our mission is always to educate, uplift, and entertain.
Yep, absolutely.
But today we checking all three of those. You gonna get educated today, TBT.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get educated.
Yes, sir.
The hood gonna get educated today.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the Bradenton Times, we've got senior columnist, the man himself, Dennis Mitch Maley, in the building.
All right.
Mitch.
What's going on, brother? How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You guys, I've been so impressed with the show so far. I'm a big fan. Shout out to whoever did that intro song too, man, because that's tight.
BG Bad in there.
All right.
I'm trying to make it
I'm
out.
gonna be hearing that in my head all week, man. I got the earworm.
I'm just trying to make it. Hey, look, hey, BG Bad, boy, you
Is
better
that
get on
singing
your
on
grind, boy.
iTunes, man?
iTunes.
It is? All right.
Yeah,
I'm buying it soon as it all.
music, Apple Music,
BG Bad.
YouTube. He on there.
BG Bad.
That's a get busy song, but I know you can't get busy with it though, right? It's too weird, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I can get busy with it though.
Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate you having the time to come spend with us. We appreciate that. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a journalist. Got into the business actually in college still, and it was back in the early internet days when they had these things called chat rooms. Okay. And there was this one on boxing, and I was a college boxer, and I had written something kind of about the politics of the sport, and just like, debating with other fans. And a guy sent me an email, and he said, hey, I see you're an actual competitor, and I actually am a magazine editor, but I produce the induction guide for the Hall of Fame, for the Boxing Hall of Fame every year. And he said, I'd really like to use this. If you could kind of clean it up a little bit, rewrite it, I'd like to use this in the induction guide. And I said, yeah, sure. And he was going to pay me money for it. So I was like, that's cool, And then I got to go to the Hall of Fame inductions that year, and I got to meet Sugar Ray Leonard, Oscar De La Hoya, Jerry Cooney, all these guys that were there, Marvin Hagler that year. And then he called me afterwards, and he said, hey, you were a big hit. He said, how would you like to write for us regularly? So I started writing for Boxing World in college, and then I kept writing when I went into the military after college for a little bit of writing for the Pentagon, for the Post newspaper, and then kept sticking with it. Then when my boxing career ended, I said, I'd really like to go back and do that as my job. And it was hard because at first everybody only wanted me to do sports. And to be honest with you, even though I spent all my life in sports, I'm not a real big sports fan. I don't really watch football. I watch with my kids and stuff, but like if it wasn't someone else's idea, I don't know if I'd ever watch it, sports again. And so I had no interest in sports journalism, but there was kind of just this like what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I do have a degree in public policy and economics, and oh, that's cute, but like, why don't you do sports? You know, so I was kind of hemmed in for a while until I could finally get to doing what I wanted to do, which took a while.
Yes, sir.
So where you from? Where you from? You said
Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania.
Pottsville, Pennsylvania, Schuylkill County, the Skook as we call it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
What got you down to good old Florida?
When I was still fighting, I was with I was living in a Connecticut suburb of New York. I was fighting at a Brooklyn Gleason's gym, and then I had my shoulder reconstructed after the Olympic trials in 2000, and I was a second alternate on that team, and I had just a real bad shoulder injury, and they had to reconstruct it, and I got real bad post-op bursitis afterward. And then when I turned pro in New York, I had a big management team behind me, and everything was going good, but I had to come back faster than I was ready, and I had another shoulder injury, so I ended up getting released from that contract, and then I ended up getting signed with a promoter in Tampa, and my ex-wife had family in Sarasota. Her parents had moved down here, and it was a good opportunity. I'd never heard of the place, never been here. I was down in Tampa. The Olympic trials in 2000 were here, but I had very little experience with it. But coming from New York to a place, I remember it was like January, and we were sitting on Siesta Key, and we had just left like 13 degrees, and it was like $1,500 a month back then for this little like rat trap apartment.
Right.
And we got down here, we're like, I think we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Hey.
I think they got a secret down here we got to get in on.
We got to get down here.
So Mitch, you went professional. You were professional.
Yeah.
So who was your biggest fight?
My over those 2 years, a lot of start and stops with injuries, so I only ended up having 4 pro fights. I ended up fighting a guy in my first pro fight. Actually, it was on Showtime at the Sundome, and I fought a guy named Willie Herring, who then went on to fight he dropped down and fought for the Cruiserweight Championship later. So I beat him. That was probably the biggest fight I had as a pro. But in the amateurs, when I was in the amateurs, I was fought against a lot of guys that went on to have pro careers, and then I sparred with some world champions. I got to spar with Tim Witherspoon one time.
Yeah,
I was young, near
yep.
the end of his career. He beat me like I was a redheaded stepchild, man. I only had about 7 amateur fights, and I showed up at a gym in Philly, and he was making a comeback. So he was in his 40s, but he could still punch. The punch is the last thing to go, you know. That's why heavyweights stay around a long time. Lighter guys, when you lose a little bit of speed, that's it. You're done.
Gotcha.
But Witherspoon was making a comeback, and I think I'd had like 7 amateur fights, and his sparring partner didn't show up. And they're like, "Hey, put the big cat in there with him." And I said, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, you just go a couple rounds, get him warm until the guy gets here." And I think he put me on the mat every time he hit me. But I went home with a black eye, and I was never as proud of a black eye as I got from a 2-time world heavyweight champion.
Wow.
Wow, man.
So how hard was it for you to because I heard you say you had shoulder injuries. How hard was it for you to walk away from the sport?
It was hard, I think, more in a way that if you give so much of your life to something, and like I was 26, 27, so like, you know, I was lucky that I had a college degree to fall back on. I'd been a military officer, so like I knew I'd be okay, but my identity as a human was so wrapped up in being an athlete and the glamour of it and the, oh, look, that's that guy. And you start like identifying yourself with that identity, and then when it's all of a sudden like, oh, nobody says that anymore, that's a little bit of an adjustment. So that, it was more like I missed that. I missed the camaraderie. I missed the time in the gym. But it didn't take long to realize that it was a blessing in that, look, it's just not a good idea to get punched in your head a lot.
Yeah.
Especially if you want to have a career using your brain afterward.
Yeah. Right.
So when I look back on it, and unfortunately, a lot of my teammates that were up near the top and then had long, full pro careers, a lot of them, they slur today. They have trouble, remembering things. And we know now, by understanding the science of CTE, that every single time you get punched in the head, you're doing a little bit of irreversible damage. Every time. We used to think like, I was fighting in the 90s and early 2000s when we knew it wasn't good for you, but the thinking was kind of like, well, as long as you don't stay too long, The thinking was, oh, it's those guys that fight past their prime, and, Ali should have just got out earlier, and it's those last couple of fights if you take too many. Nah, it's everyone along the way, man, is taking a little bit away from you.
Now, Mitch, I'm gonna tell you, man, you're a very interesting guy. I mean, I've read your bio. You're a comedian, and you've been in the Army. You've done some things, man. So, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna dive into this because I'm like I say, I'm curious. I know I'm gonna learn something. And this what marks the 100 years.
100 years.
100 years since Black Wallstreet. So, Real, you had.
Yeah, most definitely, Mitch. I wanted, first of all, I know you have write books. You wrote a couple books, and one of your books that you wrote is called Burn Wall Street.
Black Wallstreet Burn.
Burn, Black Wallstreet Burn. That's a book that you wrote. When did you write that book?
That just came out. So I wrote it over the last 4 years, and it was actually released just a few weeks before. June 1st was the centennial of the events.
Yeah.
So it was released 3 weeks before that, which was always the plan to be in conjunction with the centennial.
Well, awesome. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. That's a book that I think I find myself really interested in just knowing what you took the time out to write, for one. And also the fact that this topic is a very serious topic for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. One, especially the Black community, me being in education, me attending school for all these years, it's a disservice, and I'm sad because I had not heard about these events until just recently. So it bothers me and it concerns me, and trying to figure out why. Why haven't we learned about this? Why haven't this topic was something that we learned when we were learning about U.S. history?
Yeah.
It's a big part of U.S. history, you ask me.
Yeah.
Tremendous part. Tremendous.
Should be a part of the Black History celebration, if you ask me.
Yeah. So with Juneteenth right around the corner, and also the 100 years of this event, as far as what happened in Greenwood, I want to spend some time just talking about that a little bit. Talk about how you got to the point where you wanted to, actually where you learned it from, and to the point where you actually wrote a book on these real events that took place.
Yeah, it's weird in the sense that I wouldn't have thought, 10 years ago or something, I'd have a book like this, but it came so organically, and oddly, it was my sports career, not my career as a journalist and historian, that brought the story to me. I was listening to an interview with Deontay Wilder, who was until very recently the heavyweight champion of the world. And, Deontay's always been really big on social justice and trying to bring Black issues to the mainstream media, using his platform as a way to educate people. And during one interview, he had that big one, that viral moment. I don't know if anybody ever saw it, where somebody talked about, slavery and oppression. And, he started screaming at the guy, till this day.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, what do you mean 400 years? He's like, till this day. And in the interview, he's like, people don't want to know about what I'm talking about. They don't want to know about Black Wall Street. They don't want to know that we had a place like this and it was burned down. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, well, what's he talking about? And right away I'm Googling it, and I find this story, that this racial massacre, in fact, that I was part of a movement to reclassify how it was said, because it was always called a race riot, which is extremely
different,
misleading.
Yes,
okay?
yes.
And it was a race massacre. It was a Holocaust is probably the best word for it. Right. And you look and you're like, it was to the point where I'm reading it on Wikipedia, and I'm questioning, like I'm having this moment of, cognitive dissonance, where I'm like, how is it possible that I didn't know about this? How did I study government for 4 years in college? And then how is it that not only I don't know about it, but it seems like nobody else does either? Like, how in the world could a story like this have been suppressed? And so I go down this rabbit hole, and I watch a documentary about it. And then I read the two seminal books of nonfiction about it, right? Holocaust and Homeland and The Burning. Both great books that are nonfiction. And then I'm looking, I'm like, all right, so there's two great books out about it. There's a documentary that ran on HBO back in the 80s. It was covered in major newspapers at the time. So it wasn't like it was, deliberately hidden in total.
Right.
But I was like, so where did it get lost to history? And then when
Right.
I started talking to a lot of my Black friends, and them saying, no, I don't know it either. And I'm like, shit. I was like, even the more educated ones, where it was like, this is really weird. So this sent me into like this kind of obsession with it. And then once I'd studied it for like a couple years, I was like, well, I have a lot of information and I don't really want to just do like a feature article because I don't think anything would come from that. So what if I dramatized it, meaning tell the story instead of in a nonfiction academic way, but tell it in a narrative that's going to be entertaining? Maybe I could reach a different audience that doesn't read nonfiction books as much. And in some way, just, contribute that effort that I'd made to even, if one or two or, a few hundred, a few thousand people were to, learn about that, and I could help push that into the mainstream around the time I knew it was going to get attention at the centennial, then maybe I could, offer whatever I'd learned as a way to help people expand their knowledge of it.
That's awesome. Man.
Yeah, I mean, but you know what? I can kind of understand why a lot of African Americans is not really up on this, because there's so much Black history out there. So much, man. We can't cover it all, and I respect you today for coming here to our podcast to discuss this, by you being, a white guy, and for you to tackle this. How do you feel about what took place back then, knowing that the oppressors, was whites, doing the African Americans the way they was doing? Like, from a white guy.
That's a great question. Great question.
What's your feelings on that?
First, I thank you guys for having me, and I would say that until you have conversations like this happening between white dudes and Black dudes, then you're never going to get anywhere. Right. You're never going to get anywhere with a room full of white people saying what they feel about this issue. Right. You're never going to get where you need to get with just a room full of Black people talking about the issue. Until we start being able to be honest about it with each other and looking at it and saying, there should not be discomfort among somebody who's just white and acknowledging the reality of what happened. And if there is, then you have to turn the mirror back on yourself. And so why is that? Because it's not, if I didn't live in Oklahoma, my family wasn't even, barely over here yet. We came from Ireland. Just because I had the same skin color, if I was going to turn away from it because it made me uncomfortable because the villains in the story, well, the villains in a lot of story have white skin. And the villains in your story has Black skin, you don't turn away from it either, right? So that part of it, that does contribute to people's discomfort, but I don't think it should. And I think that when you take a story like this, one of the reasons why it got lost to history, I learned, was that it was kind of a silent agreement in Tulsa where the only way they thought they could survive it was by not talking about it. It was kind of like Blacks and whites were kind of like, yeah, we're just going to not mention those times. And there was a guy named Don Watts who was in Congress and state legislature who brought a lot of attention, and he helped marshal a lot of the resources to do a commission in the 90s and officially recognize it. He was in school in the 50s, right? And a teacher who was a teenage character in the book, and he became a teacher at Booker T. Washington High School in Greenwood, brought it up in class. And this guy, Don's like a little bit of a smart mouth. He said they called him Fat Mouth Ross was his nickname in high school. And he said, man, get out of here. That didn't happen. What are you, crazy? And so they brought in all these newspaper clippings and everything. And after school every day, he's going down to this teacher's room, Mr. Williams, and say, hey, tell me more about this. Tell me more about this. And when he went home and asked his grandparents, his parents about it, everybody had this like, oh, don't talk about that. We just don't, And that was kind of the way they dealt with it, was by just saying, listen, if we talk about it, it's going to take us back to that time and that place. Let's just get beyond it. But you don't heal, historic rifts without addressing them. So I'm glad that it's finally gotten attention. There was that scene in The Watchmen on HBO where they dramatized the airplane bombs, which is something that did happen. They used, it was it is to this day, the only place in the continental United States that has ever been bombed by airplane.
Whoa. Because it was like tear gas and a bunch of like bombs that they because I saw the special on BET. BET aired a special I think it was like right on what was it, May 31st or something?
Yeah. The event started on May 31st and then went into June 1st. So they're both kind of the anniversary. But the best understanding what happened with the airplanes was that someone, they don't know who yet, there's a lot of this story will always be lost to history. And that's where some of it had to be dramatized in the sense that I had to invent some characters, especially on the white side, because nobody was brought to justice.
Right.
So you didn't have the name of the perpetrators. You had the stories, but you didn't know who was perpetrating it. So who gave the order for the planes is not known. We do know there was state cooperation, meaning there was institutions. In specific, the Tulsa Police Department was riddled with Klan members and very dirty. And back then, in general, poor places, police departments often tended to be dirty, and it was almost like that was part of the compensation. Was, well, yeah, you don't get paid much, but you're a cop and you get to do what you want type thing, right? So you had an awful police department. And then you had the National Guard come in at some point, and there's some evidence the National Guard helped. And then at some point, somebody commandeered B-1N1 biplanes, which were training planes from World War I, from a nearby base, and they took tar balls dipped in turpentine that they would light on fire and drop out of the planes down onto the top of the buildings. That would
My
send them
goodness,
up.
man.
And that was cleanup. That was like mop-up duty after they'd already burned most of the town.
Now,
Man.
Mitch, I'm gonna need you to, cause I'm not educated. I'll be the first to admit I don't read a lot. I can read,
Cap.
but I just don't read. And so I'm gonna need you, before we do though, we gotta pay some bills. Big shout out to UGH Clinical Services.
Garbar, man, you took your COVID-19 test yet?
Yes, I did, man. I took my test, man. I took my COVID test. I got family and friends looking to take the test. All the sites closed down. So where they go? Where they go to take it?
That same problem.
No,
I got some homeboys, Robbie and Greg Stevenson, man. They still doing testing.
Yes, sir.
But I ain't got all the info on that.
Yes,
I think
sir.
Experience do,
Yes,
though.
sir. That's UGH. Be
That's
mobile.
right, that's
UGH.
right, that's
What's
right,
UGH, though? You're in good hands. Clinical service. Okay. All right.
Yes,
So,
sir.
a private company that's been committed to providing COVID-19 accessible and affordable and mobile COVID-19 tests since the pandemic began. Okay. You know, and now with Manatee County shutting down their sites, their testing sites, free testing sites, hey, these guys are committed to continuing to provide accessible and affordable COVID-19 tests, whether it's for your home, your business, it doesn't matter. Whether you need a rapid test, PCR, antibody, it's whatever. Call them and they will pull up.
Wait. You saying pull up on them?
Yes, sir. Mobile.
Pull up in your driveway.
Mobile.
And they come in the house?
As in be mobile. Yes, sir. No. They don't even need to come in the house, B.
What?
They pull up to your driveway. Very convenient.
Oh, that's first class service there.
All you gotta do is call. All you gotta do is call.
What's that number?
941.
Wait, hold up.
351-4100. Once again, that's 941-351-4100. And if you mention TBT, they'll show you a little love with a little discount.
Wait, hold on. Is that on the record?
That is on the record.
So, with that being said, can you, and I know that it's tough, you know, as quick as you can, break down the Black Wall Street and how it happened?
Sure.
Just in a
Absolutely. So what you had that I was real surprised to learn myself was the history of Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, a lot of people don't realize, it didn't become a state till 1907. So really late. It was not sought after land by any means. It was very rocky soil. It didn't want to give up any crops. It was basically where Indians who had been pushed out in the Trail of Tears, mostly Cherokees, freed black men, a lot of them that went with the Cherokees or just were freed and gravitated toward it because it was kind of a place where it was like, nobody wants it and they'll leave you alone when you go there, right? It's hard scrabble, but they'll leave you alone.
I'm sorry. I want to stop you right there because I know there was 5 Indian tribes that traveled to Oklahoma and they split that land up. But what I want to make sure that we cover is that when those Indians traveled the Trail of Tears and Death, 5,000 miles, over 100,000 Indians. They also traveled with 4,000 slaves in that travel. And when they came over, it made me think, well, wow, how do Indians have slaves? at that time. And I started just thinking, well, it makes sense that the white guys that came over always traded stuff.
No, Indians already had slaves.
They already had slaves.
It was common practice for them to enslave the conquered. And that goes back to the beginning of time. I mean, there's never, ever on the history of Earth in any sort of organized civilization not been slavery to this day.
Just blacks enslaved?
No.
When you say,
No, there's never been a
conquered. I mean, a white dude or anybody can show up and get conquered.
There have been many white slaves throughout history. There's literally not a civilization that has a major civilization in history. There's not one that has not practiced human bondage. And so there have been a lot of white slaves. There's been a lot of issues in Africa. There's a lot of black slaves held by black slave owners.
Yeah.
So there's been slavery of all kinds, all colors throughout all time. To this day, it continues to happen. I mean, when you see sex trafficking and you see a Chinese daughter getting sold to somebody and then being sent to the United States to work in a massage parlor, and she doesn't know the language, she doesn't know her rights, she's not a documented citizen, that's a slave by another name.
Yeah.
So when they did separate that land and it became the Oklahoma, then you got the Indian Territory.
There was one big thing that happened.
Yes.
1905, the largest oil deposit in the history of the United States is discovered in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
The Ida Glen Pool in 1905. It is the size of, in Saudi Arabia, all the oil in Saudi Arabia, right, is contained in basically 4 sites. They call them elephant pools. They're big, giant, shallow, broad pools. This was one of those that is comparable to one of the Saudi pools. And the reason why, so Oklahoma, they discovered the oil in 1905, and guess what? Now everybody wants that land, right?
Yeah.
So money floods in.
Absolutely.
And money floods out, right? Now, what happens is it gets the fastest statehood ever. From 1905, 1907, it's a state. Now, you think about how slow the wheels move now for stuff like that. Imagine all the way back in that time, 100 and plus years ago. So it becomes a state by 1907, and it becomes the most segregated state in the United States. There were more harsh segregation rules there than any other place, including it was the only state to ever require segregated phone booths. So not only water fountains and stuff like that, a phone booth was black only, white only.
Dang,
and during that time, Teddy Roosevelt was the president, right? And I know also during that time when they were trying to adopt the Jim Crow rules, right? There was a bunch of black people that went up to try to protest or just fight for the simple fact that they had their own land.
Yeah.
They had got the Indians got the certain amount of land, and your blacks also got over 2 million acres of land. And amongst that land, then that whole thing came about, coming to state and trying to adopt the certain laws and rules and stuff like that. And they tried to fight the Jim Crow rule, and they wanted to have their own state, but it didn't happen.
Did not happen. And it could have happened if it wasn't for the Ida Glen. There was no way they were giving them the most,
Absolutely, money.
We've never given away good land. We give away bad land, right?
Absolutely.
So you have this happen. And
they thought they were giving away bad land.
Until that,
They found
oil.
Whoa.
Black gold in here, right?
Right,
Black
oil.
gold here.
Yeah.
Texas tea.
Oil.
So it becomes the number
Beverly
one
Hills.
oil producing city in the world for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And the reason why Tulsa's not a big oil place now is because it was so easy to get to. It was so close to the surface, and as a result, it was so pure that it almost didn't need to be refined. So you could just get it out as fast as you could, right? Dang. So, and that's what they did. And it went from a city, you got to understand, Tulsa went from a city of 10,000 to a city of 100,000 in 1 decade. They call it the Magic City because they were like, they said, you look up one day and all of a sudden there was 100,000 city back then was like millions today, right? So it gets that big, and then all of a sudden, with all these rules, they realize, all right, well, we want black servants in our house because we're all cosmopolitan now. We want to have that. And the European ones are more expensive, and they're not as servile as the recent, because you got to remember, it's only one generation after slavery, right?
Right.
So there's still kind of this very servile mentality.
Right.
And they're like, so we're going to let them work in our house, and they can live in slave quarters, or servant quarters, but outside of going to the grocery stores and stuff like that, they cannot patron a store in Tulsa. They cannot rent their own house in Tulsa. They can't do anything.
Right.
So they quartered out Greenwood and said that's the only place black people could do anything. Well, there were a few very educated and industrious black men, law degrees, doctorate degrees, that came down and said, this is an interesting opportunity. Now you've got
O.W. Gurley, baby.
O.W. Gurley's one of them. J.B. Stratford was another one. Mm-hmm. They were the two primary ones. And this blew me away was that in 1921, they're both estimated to have been millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Not adjusted for inflation. Not actual millionaires.
Right.
What
year?
Hold on.
I'm
1921.
Talking about that money back then.
Yes.
You know, that's a different money.
Listen.
That's a different money right now.
That's a billion.
Without taxes, that was their money.
That was their estimated worth. You got to understand, because you didn't have a federal income tax yet, knowing somebody's worth was a little harder, but it was estimated they were each millionaire. So I was ignorant to the idea that there was a black millionaire in the United States in 1920.
No.
But there were two just in Oklahoma, right?
Yes.
It turns out there was one on Wall Street in the 1800s. So they were like a third, they're estimated. Damn. So this is how much wealth is being created, because they're seeing, hey, look, they're not like wealthy like over across the tracks. Like, you got to understand, Tulsa at that time, you would have to probably compare it to Dubai today. You couldn't even compare it to New York or San Francisco.
Totally different, baby. You're right.
You'd have to compare it to Dubai. Like, it was silly. Like, it was like, there was so much money.
And you think about it, when we were walled in, and they said, "Hey, no, you got to go and patronize your own stores." Just imagine, man, all that money circulated, just circulate within the community.
I'm visualizing that. Help me visualize more. Like what?
So,
type
but
of
listen to this.
businesses like were.
Oh, man.
Listen,
aside.
by 1920, they had this city grew.
I don't read.
It grew to a city of 10,000. Okay, so think of it's close to the size of Palmetto now. Was just the Greenwood section. All right.
Yes.
They had 2 theaters.
Right.
They had 25 fine dining restaurants. They had a hotel, the Stratford. that was on par
Luxury.
with any hotel on Fifth Avenue in London or in Paris. Right. Black owned, black only. Think about that. 1921, blacks are able. They go to New York City. There's a few places in Harlem they can go to, right? But most of the places they're using a side door if they're allowed in law. Yeah. You go to Tulsa, and you're seeing theater and going to a restaurant and living like a king.
You talk about that theater. You gotta talk about that theater called the Dreamland Theater.
Wow.
Lula Williams,
major character in the book, by the way.
Ooh, you talking about women? Women was progressive as well during that time. Don't get it mistaken. They had theirs too.
Yes, sir.
Okay. They had theirs too.
Yes, sir.
A lot part of that had to do with Stratford too.
Okay, Queens.
The way that he was.
I see you, Queens.
Hey, listen. Not only was that theater, Dreamland Theater, 700 seats. What theater you know?
Come on,
Carol,
man.
700 seats.
We
Man,
talking
listen.
about 100 years ago.
I'm telling you,
You don't
man.
have it today. Just imagine.
Boy, help me.
I mean, cars. I mean, it was
Probably had them had them
Man,
lax
can you
too.
imagine?
John Williams
Had them
Nova.
lax.
Crazy, man.
I bet
Can
the
you
boys had them
imagine-
lax back then.
Can you imagine the city of Palmetto? Everything black.
Black.
Man,
Leaders, everything.
We tried.
that's crazy.
A little bit. I mean,
But I'm saying, you know, just listen. When we talk about Black history, this is a part of Black history that we don't know, because they make us feel like back in them days, all black folks was poor.
Right.
We were slaves. We didn't own anything.
Absolutely.
That's all we
Hell of a point,
hear.
Barber.
You know, that's all we hear. And just to hear this.
But why?
This is interesting.
In other words, y'all was on one 100 years ago. Black people, y'all was on one.
Listen. I get so excited, man, because A.J. Smitherman.
You own the newspaper. Yeah.
On his newspaper.
Yes, sir.
Tulsa Star.
Tulsa Star.
Star. Yeah, my bad. It's
Talk to
Tulsa
me.
Star. You think about a newspaper that was able to put out a true narrative about what happened to the people, especially when people get mistreated. Talk about a newspaper that hired a lot of females to work on staff that actually publicized females to uplift them in the community.
Wow.
Not only that, man, in our community, right now, by default, we always say we Democrats.
Yeah.
Right. Well, AJ was a Democrat. Back then, a lot of black people was Republicans.
Yeah.
But because of what was going on with the Republicans trying to push Jim Crow and all that stuff like that, he went to his newspaper. We're not doing this.
Wow.
We need to vote.
That's courage.
For a different party.
Yeah.
And why you think you probably a Democrat now? A lot of that was influenced by AJ Smith.
Wow.
Actually, Gurley went to Democratic Party first. Now, Gurley ends up becoming the traitor in the story. Spoiler alert. But he was one of the very early blacks to leave the Republican Party and go to the Jeffersonian Democrats. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
What about banks? Did they have any
That was the one thing they didn't have. I go over that in the book. So they could not get a charter for a bank, and they were working on that at the time. So they actually have a discussion when somebody brings that up, and they said, no, we're working on that because that's the only bit of our money that's fallen through the cracks into the white man's hand.
But JB Stratford, he would give out microloans and stuff like that.
There was a lot of lending going on.
And he actually gave our newspaper $200 to start his business. Came from him.
Wow.
And they actually talk about that in my book as well.
Awesome.
So let me ask you this: did they like during that time sports? I'm just thinking of what Americans love today. We love sports, schools. Were there sports? People love Vegas.
During that time,
people love Vegas.
The only pro
so were
sports.
There casinos and all that.
There was
stuff
gambling.
As well?
It was absolutely was gambling.
Yeah, they did that.
There, sports at the time. The only thing you had was boxing. Pro sports was boxing, baseball. The NFL was just getting formed, and then you had horse racing. Those are like really the big sports at that time.
So did they have sporting events in that? Or
you didn't have any professional. You had no professional sports there. You would have boxing.
Probably some underground stuff going on.
You would have boxing, and then there was a thriving. One of the interesting parts is there was a thriving vice district in which, like a lot of cities did at the time, they said, "Hey, First Avenue, that's where you can do everything. Don't do anything off of First Avenue." So that was like the dividing line, and that was the only integrated place, strangely. And I found that throughout history, the one place you always find people integrate, no matter what, is around Vice.
Yep.
You go into a brothel, you go into a casino, you go into a bar.
Yep.
They're not as picky on who they hang out with, right?
Yep.
And First Street was very integrated, but that was all trouble and vice. Yep. And then you got to remember that you had all these people from outside coming in to work on the oil fields, the roughnecks as they call them. So that was a lot of tension too. You had this kind of like typical Midwestern town, and then you had a lot of people coming up from Texas that had very different sensibilities. You had a lot of people coming down from the north. And so there was a lot of stress and tension happening. And then what really played into this was an economic, not even a crisis, but when World War I ended, right before these events, that just caused a little bit of glut in oil. So, I mean, they still needed oil, but you know how it is, like, you know, a market gets a shock and then everybody stops spending money and stuff. So when the war armistice happened, there was quickly a glut, and they were like, for a few months, there was nobody, you know, there was more oil on the market than was necessary. The prices started falling out. And all of a sudden, the poor people in Tulsa started getting real nervous. And then you had veterans coming home. Yeah. So imagine this. You have these white vets going off to fight in France against the Germans. And they're hearing about, hey, you hear what's going on back home, man? It's like, it's crazy. Everybody's getting rich. There's all these oil fields and money. And they're like, oh, I can't wait to get home. I'm going to get home. I'm going to work. You know? Then they get home and they're like, yeah, there's no jobs right now. And they're like, wait, what? There's no jobs? And then they're looking and saying, well, God, over in what they used to call Little Africa, they're like, over in Little Africa, they're driving around in motor cars and stuff. I can't get a job. So that starts ratcheting up that tension, right?
Yep.
Then you have black soldiers coming back.
Yep.
So you had the Buffalo soldiers who, for the first time now, fought in infantry because the French, so the American fighters would not, or the American generals would not let them into their camps, but they kind of loaned them out to the French. And in this one letter, General Jack Pershing tells the French commander, listen, don't believe anything you heard. You'll find these to be some of the bravest, strongest, most eager soldiers that we found. And basically apologizing. I regret that we can't use them in combat, but please don't take that to mean they're not combat worthy. So the Obi-Man uses that letter as a speech to rally his troops at one point in the book. But the thing that you had was you had all these black soldiers coming back, and they're thinking, hey, man, I was in a foxhole fighting for this country, right? White dudes and black dudes, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Fighting for everybody. I'm going to come back now, and I'm going to wear my uniform, and I'm going to walk in the front door in Tulsa, and everything's going to be cool.
Yeah.
Well, they found out that wasn't the case.
Right.
There was more resentment now. Oh, now you're wearing uniforms, right? So you have all this happening, and like anything else, economic tension, it's the poor people getting nervous, and the poor people start looking at each other just like we are today, right? Fighting with each other and saying, oh, is it the brown person sneaking in to get a job in a field somewhere that's holding me down? No, dummy, look up. It's the banker's boot on your neck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it was the same way back then. So they were playing the people with the resources or playing the poor people against each other, saying, hey, well, maybe this is why it ain't working out for you. And that the circumstances were just rife for the one little powder keg moment to set it off, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
Man, that's deep, man.
So think about this. That's heavy, man.
It's real.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of this whole Wall Street thing. At some point, there was a shoe shiner.
Mm-hmm. Dick Rowland.
That was doing fairly well for himself. 19-year-old boy, black kid. He ended up going into some building to go use the restroom.
Yep.
And during that time, they had the restroom for black folks on the top floor. And when he entered the building, he went into an elevator, and what happened from that point?
So what you had was, and this was a big problem for the community, was that you could make so much money as a boot black in this Abu Dhabi type place, right?
Yep.
That you had kids dropping out of high school. He was a football star at Booker T. He dropped out his junior year. He's like, man, they're making sometimes $50 a day over here shining shoes. I'm going to give you a $5 tip, which back then was crazy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But you had these people that just had more money to know what to do with.
Yep.
So in Greenwood, they're saying, look, man, we're losing people that could be doctors and lawyers to be shoe shine because you could make more as a shoe shine in Tulsa than you can as a doctor over here, even though our doctors are doing well, right? Wow. So he's over there. He's shining for a white man stand, and problematic. You can't use the bathroom in Tulsa. So the guy who owns that stand works out a deal at this building, Renberg's department store, where on the 4th floor, up in a part they don't use anymore, he rents their bathroom. And he says, let my shine boys go in and just use the bathroom when they have to. So it's an elevator building, and it's the day of the Memorial Day parade, because it was Memorial Day weekend that year, same as this year. Yeah. And which was weird. The Centennial fell the same way. But he goes in, and it's closed, the department store. So it's only like the accounting offices and stuff are open. So the building's primarily empty. Back then, there was a lot of females doing male jobs because the males were all at war. Mm-hmm. So there's a female elevator person, which surprised me as well. I didn't know there was female elevator operators back then. She's only 17 years old, okay? She's in there. Now, what truly happened will probably be lost to history.
I think you're right, because we heard a couple different things.
There's a lot of possibilities.
Right.
But here's what we know. We know that there was previous reports that the elevator would stick. When you'd hit it, it would jerk, okay? That we know. We also know that the original account was given by a clerk from Rendsburg. So the best determination is that when they got to the 4th floor, she hit the button for it to stop, or the jerk the bar for it to stop. It jerked. He fell into her to prevent himself from colliding with her. Mm-hmm. She got freaked out, didn't know what was happening, and kind of screamed. And at the moment, like a movie, the door opened, and a clerk's like, "Get your hands off that woman!" Right?
Oh man.
So she's just weirded out. He's like, no, I didn't do anything. It wasn't. Call the cops. So the kid doesn't know what to do. The kid runs. And that starts the whole thing. The girl gives an account that basically acquits him. And they say, well, she seemed out of sorts. She seemed like maybe she was just delirious. So, but the clerk saw this. Let's arrest him and hold him, right? Now, there's a few, and there's something this was complicated because I no way wanted to be a white apologist in any way in this, right? I want to tell this as honestly as possible. And the reality is, I mean, look, if you think every white person there hated black people and wanted the worst for them, clearly it would have been way worse a lot sooner. But what you have in a lot of power structures is you have people at the top who create a social caste that benefits them socioeconomically, and then they enforce it by playing sides against each other. And you have some people that want to do the right thing, but they don't feel empowered to do it. And they feel like, well, I'm going to get stomped on if I step out in front of this. And then sometimes you have people that are principled to the point that they're willing to risk everything. And one of the people who did act in a very, I would say, heroic manner was Sheriff William McCullough, so you have this very corrupt police department, the Tulsa PD. It's like here, city police department and county sheriff, okay? Mm-hmm. County sheriff, back then, because there wasn't really unincorporated county and stuff, really their only job was the jail and the courts, okay, and serving warrants. Mm-hmm. So the sheriff has like 4 deputies. The police force is big. So Tulsa PD says, we want you to bring this rolling kid in. The sheriff has one black deputy, okay, Barney Cleaver, and he says, see if you can find out who this is. And he says, bring him here, though. Don't bring him to the PD. So they bring him in. Tulsa Police Department says, all right, send him down. They're like, no, come over here and talk to him. So police department gets over there. Roland's there. He's got his attorneys. The sheriff hears everything. He's like, you don't have much of a case. You might have enough to hold him on, charge him, but we both know that you need a statement from the girl for there to even be a crime. No victim, no crime.
Right.
Can't just have a witness. So police department says, all right, well, we'll take him over to jail and we'll work that out. And he's like, he stays here until he's tried, period. And they're like, they have this little standoff. And again, he's only got 4 or 5 cops. And then basically the chief of police says, all right, man, what do you see what you're in for now? So they throw their hands up and just kind of go away, the police, the Tulsa PD. And then you had the lynch mobs come. You had the Klan organizers come. So it was a long night trying to keep them safe.
And did you say did you say it was a black cop?
No, they had one black deputy on the.
For real?
Yeah.
Back in them days?
Barney Cleaver. Yep, Deputy Uncle Barney, they called him in Greenwood.
So another huge part of this story is that I believe either a day or something before, there was a young white kid, 19-year-olds, that committed murder, I believe, of a taxi driver. And
that was actually months before. Roy Bell.
Months before.
Yeah,
okay,
about 6 months before.
So when that happened,
he was lynched by the Klan.
He was lynched.
Yeah.
He was lynched. So
white dude was
Who
lynched.
was lynched?
a white kid was
They
lynched.
lynched white dudes too,
Yeah.
man. The Klan, you got to remember.
They lynched him.
If you were Catholic, you were one step above being black. If you were Jewish, you were one step above being black. They'd tolerate you, but they were looking to get you.
So the thing is what you guys got to kind of keep in mind. If they lynched him,
Right.
imagine what they're going to do to this one.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's what stirred up our soldiers to march down there to help protect him from that.
Absolutely.
Man, I never.
Oh, so we had black soldiers that came home from the war.
Yeah.
That rallied together and said that they was going to go down to the jail and protect.
You had one in particular. There was a character, Obi Man, and he was one of the more interesting. He was in his early 20s, just came back from the war and had built quite a reputation as a soldier over in France. And he was a giant man. So think back at that time. He was about 6'5" or 6'6", 260, 270 pounds in 1920.
That's a big guy.
Solid, right?
That's a big guy.
His story was that his grandfather was a white Texas rancher who was 7 feet tall back then. Mythical, like a literal giant. When his wife died, he started siring offspring with his favorite black slave, and she was supposedly around 5'10", 5'11" herself, so he had quite a few
My goodness.
big offspring. Obi Man was a force to be reckoned with, and he led the soldiers on the mission over to offer their services to the sheriff. And they said, listen, we'll guard the jail. And McCullough said, listen, you being here is more likely to cause violence than it is to solve it. So there was some back and forth there. And then another moment that's lost to history is that at some point, outside in the courtyard, going back and forth a couple blocks away. Shots were fired. An older white man was shot. One of the black soldiers was shot. And then that kicked the whole thing off. And they kicked off a night of some of the most atrocious violence that's ever taken place on this soil.
They say it took place for about 16 to 18 hours straight of just tormenting.
They burned a city of 10,000. Yeah. So there were 2 or 3 buildings left after the end. Yeah. You had summary executions. One of the most putrid examples is there was an autopsy and a report of an elderly black couple. They were going in there saying, we're burning your house out. Get out now. And they just start burning it, right? And some people were, like, I got to get something upset. Well, you got as much time as it takes to come down. We burned the base, and we're throwing stuff, tar balls and Molotov cocktails. This couple said, we ain't leaving. We're just going to pray. And praying at their bed, they each got a bullet in the back of their head.
Damn, man.
That's just one of the examples of many awful things.
So there were, at the end of the day, there were 300 people that died.
No, way more.
That was reported.
Yeah, we'll never know.
I know it's way more than that. Over thousands of people that were hurt. More people than that were homeless. Mm-hmm. Think about that. The whole city burnt down. All these people that were survivors of this incident. Now
it became a tent community. They started
living in Red Cross tents.
Yeah.
So very sad situation. Very, very sad situation. And when I look at it, man, to me, it's greed. Because I felt because I know at one point a lot of white people were trying to get into the community, start buying buildings and land and stuff like that. But it was a pushback. So this whole event kind of started one way of trying to help and protect one of the young black teenage boys that led to this event of this massacre. And we also kind of touched base on these planes that were in the area. So very sad situation, man. Something that I didn't know. I have a lot of pride in just knowing that our black community at one point was one of the richest in this country, in Greenwood, and the things they did, working together, striving together. Just amazing.
So can you say?
Amazing.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So can you say that it was almost like the white community was waiting for just an opportunity to go in and take the city over?
By that point, I would say yes. So you actually did have some whites had bought property. In fact, the way I knew this was one of the best sources of information I was coming across in the years of research I did was a insurance lawsuit filed by William Redfern, a white guy who owned some property in Greenwood. And then
he got it.
He bought it early. No, he owned it before. And his insurance policy wouldn't pay off because they were saying that it excluded riots.
Yep.
And so he sued, and the depositions, which included Gurley, was testified on his behalf. And Gurley ended up leaving in shame, one of the millionaires, and considered a traitor to the black race for the rest of his life, and was never heard from in Tulsa again. He was a star witness for the state in their commission against Obie Mann as well. He testified against them. So it was an ugly, ugly scene. But to answer your question, you had this kind of accident, this happy accident. And the irony of it is, what were white people telling black people, especially industrious business white people, telling them, hey, you got to pull yourself up. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got to make your own way in this world, right? Well, they go and do this accidentally, not meaning their work was accidental. You let them do it accidentally. You didn't realize, oh, shit, when we made these rules, we created this vacuum there, and they filled it, and oh, wow, they could run a business pretty good, and looks like, shit, they could, all these things we've been telling people about them aren't true, and that probably made a lot of people scared.
And I want to say something before we move on. I know we got to move on, but I respect this conversation that we're having right here, because it's like a round table conversation.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna get some flack from the black community, because there's gonna be people out here right now saying, how could TBT have a white guy come on a podcast talk about black history? And then you're gonna have a fan base gonna be saying, why is he on this black podcast talking about this situation. But the reason I'm saying that it's good that we're sitting down conversating like this, because this is where it starts.
I think that's
This is
what
where
he
it
said.
starts.
That's what-
Yeah, I
that's
know you
what he
said that
said
earlier, but this is where it starts. This is where it starts. So this is good information. This is good information because white folks are very, very much a part of our history. And by you coming here and giving us your knowledge, writing a book on it, hey man, that's respect.
I appreciate
it.
Absolutely,
Respect.
man. Absolutely.
Respect.
And before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to Real because it sounds like his ass read.
For sure, man. I'm impressed.
So shout out to the Gators. I mean, I guess it sounds like
Well, that's a
you
Southeast
actually
graduate.
did
That's a Southeast
earn
graduate.
your degree.
Southeast graduate right there.
Good deal. But real quick, no. I'm going left because I had a question that popped in my mind when you were talking. When all this went down, here's the question that popped in my mind. Who was the sitting president and what the hell did he do about it? Did they release a statement like, oh, you know what I mean? Because
Yes.
I know I'm thinking of now when something happened in a state
So,
address and da-da-da-da.
it was
God, you gotta
absolutely
come on,
not-
like, that's fucked up.
It was not hidden at the time. It was on the front page of the New York Times.
Right.
It was condemned by dozens of newspapers.
Who was the sitting president?
At the time, that would have been Taft, I believe.
William H. Taft. See, I
No,
did
I'm
pay
sorry. I'm
attention.
sorry. No, it wasn't.
Oh,
No, it
shit.
wasn't. It was Woodrow Wilson was the president.
Yes.
Woodrow.
Yes, Wilson.
Dub Square. I did pay attention a little bit in history class. Go ahead.
So you didn't have a Washington response.
No response. No
official.
Wait, first of all, let me think. I don't know. I wasn't born in 1921. So where's the television? There wasn't television.
You did not have television yet.
Okay.
No. Your radio was your
I'm
big.
sorry. I gotta read more.
Radio and newspapers was your
Okay,
communication.
radio and newspaper. So it wasn't. There was no
And newsreels at the theater.
Right. So there was no statement or any type of
No
news
press
flash.
corps, right.
President.
Right.
Was there any records of him even addressing?
No.
You know what's so sad? I find it to be an insult. Is that around that time when they had this this whole burning and killings and all that stuff like that, and you may have to help me out with this. I'm not too sure of names, but I do know there was 2 white males that ended up getting arrested shortly after that, and I can't remember exactly what they were doing, but they were really high. I guess people knew they were popular people.
Right.
Maybe committed some white collar crime. I don't know. But they end up getting arrested, going to jail. Now this is around that time. When they went to jail, there was a whole bunch of sheriffs, political people. I mean, they had a whole hammock of people that was out there trying to support and try to turn, hey, no, this is not right. This better not happen. Y'all shouldn't do this. These guys are good guys.
Right.
They went to war. I mean, a lot of people that were there protesting to get these guys out. Never heard anything about what happened in Greenwood. There was nobody out there supporting Greenwood the way they were supporting those 2 white guys.
Wow.
No, you had a response from the state, which was pathetic, and they basically promised all. So you had a lot of contrition expressed in the press. Right. So the worry was this is going to hurt the investment in Tulsa. This is going to hurt the foreign people that want to invest in oil fields. We got to show them we're not barbaric over here. So you had these acts of where the governor said, I am authorizing the formation of a commission, and we will have a complete investigation, and we will have a grand jury indictments issued and all this stuff. And then you had all these groups in town saying that they're going to raise money to rebuild the whole thing. And it was a few, bad apple type situation instead of being kind of an organized state-sponsored event. And nothing just ever happened. It was just enough, like, let's put a little bit of a smiley face on this for a couple days. And then looking back, you had a really bad flood hit the Midwest that was Monday, like by Friday. And then like epic, like natural disaster. And it was like today, all of a sudden, all the cameras went to that other place. And they're like, oh yeah, they're doing a commission and they're going to do indictments. Well, the indictments come back after the Blue Ribbon Commission. There were literally more black people indicted than whites. Wow. And the whites that were indicted were all bootleggers and just to use it as an excuse to bring in people they wanted to bring in anyway. Wow. There was nobody
hey, man,
on the counter.
Hey, I love the dialogue that was fascinating, and I learned a lot from what you're saying, and I can't wait to get an opportunity to read your book. But
Go and get it.
Yeah.
I'm leaving a copy with you, man. You won it from having done the most homework today.
All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna support. I'm gonna be real with you. Okay, go ahead.
Do you know if it's any type of respirations going on? Like,
yes. So some things have happened over the years. So then in the 90s, that congressman that I mentioned earlier was able to get the state to finally, in 93. In fact, one of the things that helped with that was in Florida. So that was just a couple years after we had the formal recognition of, I'm drawing a blank, what's the town up? Rosewood. Yeah. So Rosewood had the formal recognition, and that kind of drove Oklahoma to say, okay, I guess we can come up and, make our amends now too. And there was investment reparations. There was one of the main fighting grounds. They made it into a park that named after John Hope Franklin. There was some really interesting history that came out of it in that, so Buck Franklin, who was the attorney who then actually fought one of the things they tried to do to make sure Greenwood wasn't rebuilt was they did these really harsh zoning laws right after it was burned down. And they said nothing can be built unless it has brick in that district all the way. They're like, we got to build with wood. And nope, brick only. They're like, we'll never be able to rebuild it. Yeah, we know. They wanted to do an industrial zone in there, right? Mm-hmm. So Buck Franklin sued all the way to the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, and won. He was an attorney that in fact, it's his firsthand account that proves the airplane bombings, which was denied for a long time. Right. His son went on to become the national historian, John Hope Franklin, and the park is named after him. And then also a character from the story, Samuel Hooker, who owned a upscale clothing emporium in Greenwood. His daughter became the first black female in the history of the Coast Guard, and then went on to become a famous psychologist. She was one of the last survivors to pass away. She passed away in 2018. Olivia Hooker, wonderful, wonderful story of a very accomplished woman. So you have these multi-generational people. That was some of the happy endings that came out of it, was some of these people that went through that. You had their later generations going on to doing great things and then bringing the attention back to it.
When you said last survivor, you meant survivor of the...
Yeah, there's actually two or three survivors still left.
To this day, there's still two survivors.
One of them just testified to Congress this month.
One of them was
107 years old.
A female too, right? Is it a female? Yeah.
She just testified to Congress.
But let me ask you something, Mitch.
You mean testifying to Congress as in the case is still like...
No, just testifying when they acknowed it. So that,
Okay.
A quick question, Mitch.
Wow. Shout out to those two survivors, man.
I never been to Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Have you? So you visit Greenwood?
I have not been to Greenwood. No, I am going.
I wonder what's Greenwood like now, though. I wonder what.
No, it's of course.
It's gone. Listen,
yeah, it's different.
Here's what happened. You know what killed Greenwood eventually? The interstate. And you know what else? Integration.
Wow. So there's no city called Greenwood, Oklahoma.
No, there's a Greenwood. There's 2 blocks left where they've commemorated it, and then the interstate runs behind that. So you have the central business district where Gurley's Hotel was. Where the Tulsa Star was, all that stuff. Those 2 blocks are still there.
Where's that located? Like what? Like if I wanted to travel,
you went to Tulsa, it's in Tulsa. It's a section in North Tulsa. Yeah, it's on the north end of Tulsa.
Because it was a high school in Greenwood.
Booker T. Washington.
Booker T. They actually moved Booker T to another spot in.
Yeah, it was one of the buildings that did survive the fire. It was one of like 3 places. The AME church did. The hospital and the school, that was it. The whole rest of the city was burned down.
Okay.
All right. The survivor is Miss Viola Fletcher. She was 7 years old.
Viola Fletcher?
Yes. She was 7 years old.
That's the one that's
107. Yeah, just
that happened. So she's 107.
Shout out to Viola Fletcher.
Yeah. Man, you said the AME.
Awesome, man.
You said somebody AME church, huh?
We need to get on TBT.
Man. Hey, look.
Miss Viola, if you out there.
And she was AME church survivor.
Who's the other survivor? Who's the other? You said 2. Is Viola?
I'm not sure. I think there's 3.
Yes.
Miss
Like
Viola
I said, the other one I mentioned.
I know Miss Viola singing right now. I'm coming up.
So Mitch, I want to do this, man. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. And talk a little bit about, it seems like you're a guy that is for what's right and what's just. what belongs to some people or whatever. Just, stay in your yard, I stay in mine. Let's try to work things out. Let's work together. One town, one team. All right. So the thing is, I would have never known who you were until these articles start coming out about LMA and the things that you wrote in those articles. I know this community is probably feel the same way I feel. Like, wow, they were impactful. They were filled with documents and facts and what happened during this whole situation. And honestly, when I think about what happened in Greenwood, I can kind of lightweight want to say
situations. Absolutely,
they can be very similar.
Absolutely.
So I know, we were discussing in our pre-production meeting about some things that we want to discuss. One being, what made you so interested
in the Lincoln story?
Yeah.
It's what I call an orphan story, and I get a lot of those. And what I mean by that is nobody picks it up. And I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm a columnist. So what I do is typically very different than what I do in those three parts. And as media has changed like every other industry, and we're really, the news industry is hurting worse than it's ever been hurting. There are less people working in news today than there was when they started tracking it in the 1970s, not adjusted for population, right? Mm-hmm. So you have less resources. And investigative journalism, which is where you get justice from, is the one that makes the least amount of business sense, because it might take you 6 months to get a story. It might take you 2 months, might take you a month and a half, and you find out there's no story to get, and you've wasted all those resources and you produce no content. And now content is worth less and less and less. You got to produce more and more and more of it. So people are moving away from this. Publishers saying, well, and less people read it. So like you could have a story that says like homeless guy bites cop, right? And then boom, that takes you 20 minutes to write, and you've got 100,000 people reading. It's viral. Then you write Justice in City Hall, and 600 people read it, and it takes a week to write. So a publisher looks at it and says, "Well, that don't make no kind of business sense, right? I'm not gonna sell, the French fries. I'm selling the burger, right? That's where the return is." So this story did not get told correctly, and there were a lot of people reaching out to me little by little and telling me, "Hey, man, you should take a look at that." And I was like, all right. So I took a little peek and I said, what about this and this? And I didn't always get the answers. And I talked to Mr. Hundley, to Eddie, a few times. And at first it was kind of like, and he was going through it at the time. He was in a bad place. And when I talked to him, he would just dump. And it was just, and he sent me 400 documents. He's like, see this? I said, slow down, man. Slow down. Just tell me what happened. Mm-hmm. And it took us a while to develop that, where I was like, you gotta talk to me like I have not seen any of this.
No clue.
Right, yeah. And you just got to tell me the story. And then you got to give me the documents one by one as you're telling me them, so I can verify everything. Right. And this is going to take a lot of time. So that was happening last summer. He and I started a dialogue. And then the elections were coming up, the primary. I said, okay, well, I can't get to it before the elections because, 70-hour work weeks and stuff. And my book was coming up. Right. And then it was not getting the right treatment. Some more bad things were happening. And I think it was working on the book. I was like, man, I got to take on this orphan story. I was like, it's not the right time. I was like, God, my kid's a senior in high school trying to, doing all those college apps. And I was just like, taking on again, and remember, I don't do investigative journalism. So this is now, you could be new like, territory. You're a mechanic, right? And now somebody's like, yeah, but you want to rebuild a transmission. You know what I mean? Like it's a whole different level of like, And I was like, all right, well, let me dive in. And the more I dove in, the more it was like, man, now I gotta do another records request, because it was one thing under another. And I started learning real quick, though, it's not adding up. And here's one thing that happens in that new media environment I just described, is at the same time we're getting smaller and less resourced, government institutions are expanding their so-called communications department, their public information officers and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And they're really building expensive in-house PR firms for the most part. So they have all ex-journalists who they pay twice as much as what they made as a journalist. Yeah. And have better benefits and everything like that. So they draw a lot of people into that line of work now. And their job now is what we call flood the box. And they just put out their narrative. This is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. Over and over. This is what happened. And then it becomes very hard to not accept that narrative when an institution, that resource, is providing you with information, right? So what I noticed and what I fell victim in, like not covering the story, I fell victim to the district's narrative. And I thought, okay, you know, even if it wasn't done right, the story I'm getting and the stuff I'm seeing from the district says they were probably always going to lose the school anyway. And that was the narrative. That was the answer you got on every one thing. And that's when it started. I started to realize I was getting shined, was when it was like, wait a minute. Every time I point out something that don't add up, you tell me, well, don't worry about that thing because these things over here would have, the water bill was, don't look at the water bill. And I'm like, as a journalist, it's like, as soon as you tell me that, that's all I'm looking at, right? And then you start hearing stuff like this too. You start hearing stuff like, well, listen, obviously you're smart enough to understand that. Oh, you're going to tell me how smart enough I am and I'm not now, right? And you start realizing, I'm getting worked. I'm getting slow walked on this. Yeah. So my ears go up and I'm like, all right, I want to see some more now. Send me this, send me this. Yeah. And I'm not getting the answers. And I'm finding out the answers don't exist. And it was, wait a minute. You can't tell me not to look at the water bill because everything that happened only happened because you used the emergency procedure. And that's what's so critical to understand about the Lincoln case is that they used a never used emergency takeover process. Okay? That changes the whole ball game. Now, all your due process that you're entitled to, you don't have that no more. It's emergency. Nothing we can do. We can't give you your rights now. Now, start thinking about that. Right. There's a process in which you could say, now look, regularly, your finances could be all kinds of messed up, like many of the charter schools have been and still are, right? They could be all jacked up.
And way worser.
Yes. And they could say, we're going to tell you that they're messed up, and then you got 30 days to look at it, and you got 60 more days to answer back, and then we get to have a hearing, and then, worst case, you're going to enter a recovery plan, and then you're going to go through a year with that in play. But if you have an emergency takeover,
none of that. Bam.
We're taking it tonight.
Absolutely. Man.
Right?
Man.
Tomorrow morning, you're locked out. So that's what happened at that meeting. So when you go and you watch, I challenge everybody out there, they're all linked in the articles, look at the workshop, even more than the evening meeting. They had a workshop in the afternoon, meeting at night. You can't vote in a workshop, but Lincoln also wasn't afforded the opportunity to talk in the workshop.
I was there.
So you have the workshop.
I was there.
With them getting up telling, oh, it's so bad, they're going to turn the water off. How could you have a school with no water? It's a danger to kids. It's absolutely dangerous to kids. And, we got this letter from the Commissioner of Education. He might come down and take it over himself. Oh, what are we going to do if we don't? We got to act now. Don't let this go to a recovery plan. Don't let this go to a hearing. Don't give them 120 days to answer all the things we're saying that they're contesting and they're saying aren't true. Let's not have a whole like, hey, let's hear their side and hear their side. Let's just take it. And then once we take it, let them try to defend themselves without their computers, without their building, without their information, without any of the stuff, right? Absolutely. And instead of taking it over and running it, which the statute requires them to do,
right?
What they do to all the vendors, they cancel them all.
Canceled everything, change everything.
So I started looking at the numbers, and I'm hearing this 1.5 million all the time. They're 1.5 million in the hole, man. They were never going to get out of that. Where's the 1.5 million come? Oh, you canceled the bus contract that they had, what, a 6-7 year contract or something. Right. Oh, we default on that, and we start another one through the school district. Well, what happens when you do that? The whole balance comes due. The same thing. You lease a car, right?
Comes to you.
And you say, hey, Conley Buick, come take the keys. They don't say, oh, okay, man, cool. You get the bill for everything left on that lease. Same thing happens with all these vendors. So you engineered the financial crisis later that you used to say was part of the reason you took it. That didn't exist until you took it. And taking it allowed you to make it exist. So that means I have to look really close at why you took it. And oh, shit, it doesn't add up. They weren't behind on the water bill.
Now, I don't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
But I want to give you a fun fact in regards to the water bill narrative and the fact that the kids will be at risk, no water and this and that. I was working a summer program prior to the takeover, and the city had It was located in front of Pixon. I'm not sure of the street, but they had some work that they had going on, and they did some. They had to do some digging, and they actually had to cut the water off
at LMA.
You know what I mean? So now that plays into the narrative of no water, which we actually didn't, but it was because the city cut it off. The district did, provide water. They shipped us crates of water bottles for the kids. It was tough.
But they weren't quite as concerned on that incident, were they?
Man, that's what?
Interesting.
So
very interesting.
Coming up, I'm born and raised here. And there's only a couple of newspapers, 3 newspapers that I know about. Bradenton Herald. He had the Herald Tribune. Then he had Sarasota Times or something like that. Sarasota Herald. Okay, now Bradenton Times. Okay, now how long has that been in existence?
2009. So that was started by Joe McClash, who was a 22-year county commissioner.
Yeah.
And he started it for the very specific reason that he said there's a conflict of interest on all these newspapers.
I heard that.
Because the people who are buying the ads are controlling the narrative.
Right.
And, he's on the county commission, and he's seeing stuff like, well, all these home builders buy all these expensive ad accounts with the Bradenton Herald, and the Bradenton Herald will never report when I'm on the county commission saying about how we shouldn't give that developer a rezone to build those houses. Right. And they're always coming down on the side of the developer or not reporting it or just ignoring it. And then other industries like the phosphate mining and Piney Point and, why are they never against that in their editorial page? Oh, look at who bought an ad this week. So he started a community paper he's a very, very wealthy man. And he started with the idea of, look, tell the truth, spell everybody's name right, and that's all I want you to do. He hired me to run it and said...
Because
for years, Bradenton Herald always put out lies.
It's the narrative that we grew up with that the Bradenton Herald or whatever is in bed with.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the narrative, in bed with.
Well, you have other things that happen too. Is that in small towns you have this professional class where you see this spoil a lot of well-intended journalists. Is you develop sources, and then you talk to them a lot, and then you become sometimes friendly to get information with them. Right. And a lot of times people start to forget those relationships, and then they're going to the same banquets and they're going to the same fundraisers and galas, and they're kind of rubbing elbows in all the same circles. And then it develops where, somebody's able to say, hey man, come here. I can't go on the record for this, but let me tell you what's really happening. And they're slow walking them. They're planting the narrative. And then you think, oh, Johnny's a good guy, good dad and raises his kids and seems to want good for the community. So I'm sure he's giving me a good information. No, Johnny's giving you the information he wants to get out. And as a journalist, you can never forget that, is that you don't have friends, you've got sources. And you've got a job to do the same as they do. And I have people that, confuse that sometimes. And they say, hey, man, I thought we were friends. You wrote this. It's like, well, did you think we were friends before you voted? You know what I mean? Like, you didn't say, I wonder what Mitch is going to write on Sunday. If you voted the way you voted, I gotta report what I report.
Yeah.
Well, Mitch, that sound you just heard brings us now to our infamous On the Record segment. And it's our version of the hot seat, so to speak. But you are, truth be told, on the record. And I'm going to dive in with a question on the record.
Got it.
On the record, Mitch. Coming up, young black man, we was always told, get your education. The biggest fear of the white man is an educated black man. Black Wall Street. I need to study more, but for what I've learned so far, I've got a sense of pride, man. You telling me we had black millionaires real back in 1900s, in the 1800s?
For sure.
So that's a sense of pride. And that's telling me, our queens had their back.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm talking about we know how to make things happen in the worst of situations.
We always have.
So with that being said, do you think that because the Black Wall Street was an example of, if these Negroes, I'm keeping it 100, this is on the record, are educated and they understand what their capability of, that's like a fear for the white man?
I think for certain ones, I'm leery of I don't think using the white man and the black man is a good parameter because it's generalizing for everybody.
Right.
And I think when you look at most injustices, they're not born out of any kind of genuine malice and hatred. They're born out of greed. And when you look at the systems that are put in place from the beginning of time, we talked before the show about all the different ways there was slavery in every empire ever. They're socioeconomic problems. And when you're socioeconomically disempowered, that's good for the controlling class, right? And causing divisiveness between the different factions of the proletariat class, okay, the lower socioeconomic rungs, right, is the way that you make sure they never, ever, ever find out who the real oppressor is. And the way I always say this, you got white people, black people, and brown people, poor ones, pointing the finger at each other, saying who's eating my lunch, right? So, and they're fighting like dogs in the street, so they never look up to see that it's the banker of any color's boot that's on their neck. Yeah. And that whole thing, all those things. So it wasn't a, hey, let's take off the black people, or those things were historically put in there. Listen, there were white people during that time that I'm sure felt like, listen, I've never owned a slave or participated in any of those things.
Right.
But
right,
if you give them all their rights, they might really hate me. And I don't want to see them get in power. They might just look at me as a slave owner and want to come after me. And that was something that was taught. Right. It was taught like, hey, listen, if we don't keep them in their place, bad things are going to happen. Yeah. So that was played on. It was like, look, I know you didn't own a slave, but they're not going to think of that when they come out with the pitchforks and stuff. They're just going to see the color of your skin.
Right.
Other thing you got to remember was the definition of whiteness is constantly expanding. So when people say we'll be a majority country, no, we won't. And what I mean by that is my family's Irish, okay? They all came over because there was a famine. You couldn't eat, and you were going to do whatever you had to do to get across a boat that you're probably going to die on. And then if you got there, they would take any job on anything, right? Yeah. So just like a lot of people coming from Argentina and poor gang-infested places in South America today that do the same thing, right? The guy that fixes my roof and cuts my lawn, they're coming from places like that where they're complete desperation, and they're like, okay, I'm here. I'll do whatever. I could eat. I'll do whatever. Yeah. So the Irish people were looked down upon. We were not considered white at all. And in fact, in the place where I'm from in Pennsylvania, there are still some places that have the signs that say, Irish not welcome, Irish not hired, all stuff. And you know what a common saying was at the time?
What's that?
An Irishman will do for a nickel what an N-word will do for a dime, and a white man used to get a quarter for. That's what we were talking about, like the Mexicans. Like the Mexicans are here to steal our jobs. That's how the Irish people were. It wasn't until, and in fact, if you go back to the history of it, it was shocking when John F. Kennedy, as an Irish and a Catholic, which was verboten in white America at the time, right? The Klan lynched Catholics. The Klan lynched Jewish people as well. They were not as, like I said, they were tolerated a little bit more than blacks, but not much. So that changed with Kennedy. And then all of a sudden, Irish people were like, well, there's a lot of them. The Catholics procreated a lot, so that's a lot of votes. Let's bring the Irish in. My dad talks about in the 50s and 60s, Italian wasn't considered white. Italian was basically how we look at like Puerto Ricans now, and a lot of what we call Latino populations. It was not really white. It was something in between, and there were a lot of slurs and everything that kept for the Italians. But then, as Italians became more of them, and they assimilated. Now, again, both of those cultures have one big giant advantage that black people don't, is that you can kind of hide that. You don't know right away I'm Irish until I told you, right?
You just see white skin color, right?
But it used to be that my name would be enough that it'd be like, who's this man?
Right.
So Mitch, I got an on the record question for you.
You got
it. Yes, sir.
Since you started the LMA investigation, and you've been writing about it, what has been, or have you been, negatively looked at by the white community?
No. Obviously, the people who are threatened by what I reported, of course. Okay. But that's par for the course with what I do. Gotcha. They're all the people that don't like me already. But the no, there's absolutely not. I mean, the vast majority of white people want social justice, and they also want good race relations. Good. You know, there's absolutely the idea that the majority of white people don't. That's something that I couldn't stress enough to the black community, is that the vast majority of white people, if they have any apprehensions, it's probably because of that latent, well, I don't think I've ever done anything wrong, but am I looked at as one of the evildoers?
Man, that's why it's important that you go back and look at the time to push the reset button episode.
The reset button.
Yeah. That's what we're talking about, changing the mentality on it. Yeah. B, what's up, baby? You on the record.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's been a pleasure, you know, having you here and getting all this history. But I just want to ask you a question on the record, because I hear you talking. You speak with so much passion and conviction about this. What drives you to speak on these topics of injustice, you know, especially about LMA and the 1921 massacre? Where's that coming from?
I think a lot of it was growing up really poor, seeing a lot of injustice and seeing that, hey, what they're telling me isn't really the way it is. And then seeing that, you know, there's a lot of messed up things in our society that as a kid, we're the richest nation in the world. And I always hear all this stuff about how great we are and all these things we've done. We got to be able to do better than we're doing on this. My parents took in foster kids when I was growing up. So we had people come through the house, man, that had horror stories. And you look at this, and then you see what the system does to them a lot. A lot of times the worst things that happen to them are other foster homes. And you're looking, you're saying, how can the richest nation in the world not invest in their most vulnerable populations? The most vulnerable population is a foster kid, period, end of story. An abandoned child. No population has somebody that's more exposed and open to being victimized as an abandoned child, right? Wow. You go through the history of orphanages, through the churches, nothing but horrid stories, okay? So you see that, you say, how can we not do better on that? How can we not fix some of these easy things? Why do we spend $1 trillion a year in the Pentagon, but we got homeless vets that can't get their medicines? So you look at it and you say, oh, I start to get it now. I start putting the dots together in my teenage years. I'm like, that's how you keep the social hierarchy. Because at the end of the day, when you think about back when we were hunters and gatherers and stuff, right? Everybody had to pull their weight and do their job. And you got your equal share of the tribe's spoils, right? We live in a world now. One of the things I hate most is the what I call the balling out of control culture. The idea that you ain't shit unless you got money and an expensive car and a bigger house than you need, and you're out showing people that you could waste it because you got so much. That's what makes you valued, right? But I teach my son all the time, you got to think about that, in that if you want to live that kind of lifestyle, for every person living that means there's got to be hundreds of subjugated people somewhere in the world toiling 18, 20 hours a day so that you could live with the share of 400 people. You don't need any of those things. So you have to look that there's another end of that math equation. And I think that growing up poor, you see, oh, it's always my people that are on the wrong end of that. And I'm not, there's two ways you can look at it then. Either I'm going to go out and get mine, and that's what, there was obviously mentality in that when I was chasing professional sports, and everybody said, hey, that's your ticket out. You could not have to worry about those things. Or you could say, I'm going to put that energy into fighting for justice and pointing it out. And I looked at all the different ways I could do it. And I said, you know, I think the talent I have is standing up and saying, that's wrong, and here's what you got to look at. And I dedicated my life to really kind of doing that, just trying to shine that light.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Good, man. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
So on the record, okay.
Good.
We're still on the record. Well, I got a couple on the record. Fun questions on the record, real quick. Boxing, real quick. Short answer. Were you chasing money, or were you chasing more so to be the best?
I loved boxing. It was a good place for me to take a lot of the anger and the frustration I have and channel it into something that was positive.
Okay.
So it probably kept me out of jail as a troubled kid. And I had a couple minor stints. I never sentenced, but I was in some trouble, and it was a way to channel that, and it was something I loved. Like, I recognized the difference when I said I played football for a year in college and I finished wrestling boxing. I realized I didn't love football. I loved camaraderie. I loved the game, but I hated the practice. I hated a lot of the parts of it. With boxing, I loved every second. I wanted to be in the gym. I wanted to be in a new drill. I wanted to be studying film. It was all just a passion. So it was very much something I enjoyed.
Okay, question. How many times did you get knocked the fuck out?
One time. One time. I had the lights turned out one time.
By who?
Like,
By
knocked
who?
the fuck out, like, one time.
Actually, a dude, shout him out, his name was Javier Mora, and he became a good pro. He fought James Toney. He was a pro contender. He never fought for the heavyweight title, but he was real close. Right. And big Mexican dude, right? Yeah. And this was in the Olympic trials in 2000. And he was bigger than me, but I was way more experienced. I was definitely the favorite, right? It was going to be an easy fight. Right. And he was only, like I said, like I think 18. Yeah. And I'm like 22. Yeah. And I have my man strength at that point.
Yeah.
You know? This kid ain't going to beat me. He still got boobies and stuff, right? I'm like, I'm hard. Right. And I'm beating him in the first round. I'm beating him in the second round. Then I start getting a little cocky, and I'm popping him.
You got cute.
I got the hand down.
You got cute.
And he just came over the top with an overhand right.
Shit.
And next thing I know, I'm in the corner.
Your
I'm
ass
like, all right,
sleep.
how many more rounds? They're like, there ain't no more rounds.
Your ass sleep.
Season's over.
Okay, nah. I ain't gonna hate on you. I'm not gonna hate on you with that.
Boy.
Just like I'm gonna ask you how many times you got knocked the fuck out. How many times did you knock somebody else the fuck out? How many knockouts you had?
Amateurs and pros together, I think 22 or 23.
That's what's up. 22-1. Shit, I'll take that.
Hey,
Shit,
man.
you gonna take a L.
All day.
You gonna take a L.
My-
DB, right? You got beat before, right? Real?
He gets-
Oh,
My amateur record was 63 and
Them
10.
damn
So I lost 10
sauce.
I was 63 and 10
Gators,
in the
boy,
amateurs, and I was 3 and 1 in the pros.
Oh man,
That's awesome.
What's up?
Hey Mitch, man, I gotta say, man, you knocked out this interview.
I appreciate it, man.
You knocked this out.
Appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely.
man,
So-
great round table conversation,
appreciate
man.
you.
Great,
appreciate
great,
you.
man.
That public book one more time. What's the book called?
Absolutely,
Burn,
man.
Black Wallstreet Burn. And I will be at the Juneteenth Festival this weekend at AME Church.
Where's that?
AME Church
AME
in
Church
Bradenton.
located
In Bradenton.
Ward Temple.
Ward Temple.
Shout out to Ward
Hey, listen,
Temple. Y'all better
listen,
show up and
listen.
show out.
I will be
Mitch,
there signing
show up and
copies.
show out, black people.
That's my childhood church.
Is that right?
That's the church I grew up in.
So you need to be there.
About a half a mile up the road, I grew up in a neighborhood called Rogers Project.
I know where Rogers is. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Our office is right by there, man.
Go
concrete
and get
jungle.
that. Go
We used
and
to
get
walk.
that.
We used to walk the Ward's Temple. My
You
grandma.
get that.
13 Dream Center and everything.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go and get
Boys
that.
Club.
Hey,
yeah.
941, go pick up
TBT,
that book.
TBT
And
viewers,
go
go and
pick
get
up
that
that
book.
book.
Another thing
It's
about
available.
this round table conversation, you said 100 years ago, this happened June 1st.
Yep.
That's my birthday, June 1st.
Cigar barber.
You know,
God,
June
Baba.
1st, man. So,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
yeah, man. I mean,
Yes,
I hate that happened
Right.
in June 1st, man. But yeah.
You'll never forget the anniversary.
Oh
Fellas,
man.
Just one fun fact, right quick. The two survivors were brother and sister. It's three,
Oh.
but two of them were brother and sister.
Hey, boy. Well, that's
Viola,
some family
Viola
genes.
Fletcher, and Hughes Van Ellis. They say they still have nightmares about that day.
Now listen, TBT Nation. Those are T-shirts you need to get. Those two. Name what their names again, Brian?
Viola Fletcher.
Put them
Hughes
across your
Van
chest.
I need
Ellis.
one. Somebody
I want
send
one.
me that.
If any help out there, can y'all give us a T-shirt with those faces on it?
Absolutely.
That's big time.
Yeah, I would love
And
that.
they still living today.
We need
Yes,
to wear
sir.
that on the
And they
show.
brothers and sisters.
Why I take that? Somebody send it to. I need
107
size large.
years old.
I need a size large.
107 years old.
Don't even walk with a cane, baby.
Wow. Mitch Maley. Truth Be Told. Hey, go out and get that book.
It's on Amazon.
Burn,
Free shipping.
Black
Prime.
Black Wallstreet.
Yeah.
Burn.
Where can they get it at again?
Now, I got you. Amazon.
Okay.
Amazon hardbook cover $24.99, or you can do it if you got that Kindle account $19.99.
And it will be out on Audible next month. As
Okay,
well, if you don't listen to it.
there it is. Now check this out. I told you already. I don't read. I got too many problems to be reading. I ain't got time. I got bills, this and that. Shit.
Put on the
Give me a
card,
headache.
man.
No. But what I will do is I'm gonna buy that for my mom. She's a reader. She's got that Kindle account. I'm gonna support you, my brother.
Appreciate it.
That's what's up.
They can find it in the description of this video.
Oh.
Hey, there it is.
There it
TBT.
is. You can find this in the description
description
of this video.
This
TBT.
episode.
Absolutely, and we appreciate you, Mitch Maley. I'm sorry, I gotta put some respect on your name.
Put some respect on it.
Dennis Mitch Maley. And this is TBT, and as usual, it's this side, it's Mitch side, and then it's us.
Troof Be Told.
And it's what?
On the record.
I'm just trying to make it out now.